It began on one of those nights where the streets feel like they're holding their breath. Just after 11 p.m., Toledo, Ohio was quiet. The kind of quiet you only hear when the shift workers are already home and the late-night drifters haven't yet stepped out. A slow drizzle clung to the air, coating the streetlights in halos of gold. Lieutenant Colonel Amara Lewis, a name that carried weight in every military circle she'd ever set foot in, was behind the wheel of her government-issued black SUV. She was coming home from a late meeting at a base nearly 2 hours south, her mind already halfway to the warmth of her living room. The hum of the tires against wet asphalt was almost hypnotic. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't weaving. She wasn't doing anything except driving home. But to Sergeant Brent Halford, who sat in his cruiser parked along Reynolds Road, none of that mattered. Halford had been with the department for 16 years, and somewhere in that time, the line between serving and controlling had blurred. He liked being the kind of cop people thought twice about challenging, the one whose presence made rookies straighten their backs, and whose voice could silence a room. And on nights like this, when the radio was dead and boredom gnawed at him, the smallest spark could feel like an opportunity to reassert who was in charge. That spark appeared in the form of an unfamiliar SUV gliding down the road. Halford's eyes narrowed. He didn't see a woman headed home after a long day. He saw someone to stop, someone to question. He flicked on his lights before Amara could even register the cruiser behind her. The blue and red strobes lit up the empty street. She slowed, signaled, and pulled over calm, deliberate, controlled, just as she'd been trained to do through 20 years of service. The patrol car door slammed. Halford approached, flashlight in one hand, the other resting casually but unmistakably on his holster. No greeting, no explanation, just license and registration. Amara kept her hands on the wheel where he could see them. She rolled the window halfway down. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were drifting between lanes," Halford said, shining the light directly into her face. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might be under the influence." "I wasn't." "License and registration." Louder this time. Amara didn't argue. She moved slowly, deliberately, retrieving the documents from the glove box. As she handed them over, she said evenly, "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee." Halford glanced at the ID, his mouth tightening into a smirk. "Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." "Step out of the vehicle." Her brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "I'm conducting a sobriety check." "On what grounds?" "I've complied with your requests." "I haven't been drinking." Halford's stance shifted closer, his voice hardening. "Now you're refusing a lawful order?" "No," she said calmly. "I'm asking for clarification." He didn't like that. Without another word, he opened her door himself. "Out, now." Amara's hand moved to her phone. The record button lit up. "Just so we're clear," she said, "this interaction is being documented." A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but it vanished quickly. She stepped out, her posture straight, her voice quiet, her presence unshaken. Even in civilian clothes, there was something unmistakable about the way she stood. Years of leadership had carved discipline into every gesture, and though she wasn't defiant, she was unyielding. Halford ran her through the field test like she was some reckless driver plucked from a weekend party. She passed each step flawlessly. No stumble, no slur, no hesitation. Still, he wrote her a citation for failure to maintain lane. She accepted the paper without a word. Just a look. Then she got back in her SUV and drove away. Halford had no idea that this wouldn't be the last time he'd see her, and certainly not the last time he'd hear her name. Back at the station, he filed the report like it was nothing, logged the citation, uploaded the body cam footage, and tossed the camera into the charging dock. In the break room later, he laughed about it. "Lady tried to pull rank on me," he said to another officer. "Flashed her government ID like I was supposed to be impressed." "What was her name?" the younger officer asked. "Lewis. Amara Lewis." The room went still for a second. "Lieutenant Colonel Lewis?" Halford frowned. "You know her?" "She gave a leadership talk at the academy last year," the younger cop said. "She's no joke. 2 deployments. Runs logistics out of Fort Wayne. Everyone respects her. Halford shrugged. Doesn't matter who she is. On the road, I'm the authority. But the words didn't land as confidently as he'd meant them to. What Halford didn't know was that by the next morning, Amara had filed a formal complaint, not just with internal affairs, but with the Office of the Inspector General. She'd sent the phone footage to her legal team, and copies were already making their way quietly through the military chain of command. She wasn't new to disrespect. As a black woman in uniform, she had faced her share of subtle dismissals and overt challenges, often from people who didn't think she belonged in the position she held. She had learned to pick her battles, but this wasn't just about her. It was about every young soldier she had mentored who had been talked down to, every civilian she had seen mistreated with no one to speak for them, every black woman who had swallowed her pride to avoid escalation, knowing that the wrong reaction could be the difference between going home or becoming a headline. Not this time. In her office at Fort Wayne the morning after the stop, Amara sat with her aide, Sergeant Daniels. "You good, ma'am?" he asked, stepping inside. No, she said quietly, "but I'm handling it." He hesitated. "You want me to loop in the base attorney?" "Already done." "You sure you want to go public?" "I'm not looking for headlines," she said. "I'm looking for accountability." Her rank was more than a title stitched onto a uniform. It was earned through years of work, through decisions that had real consequences for the lives of others. She had commanded convoys through hostile terrain, coordinated disaster relief operations, and led teams across 4 continents. Yet on a quiet Ohio road, none of that had mattered. To him, she had been just another driver to control. And that was the problem. She made her calls to the JAG office, to the Inspector General. She filed the complaint, attached the videos, kept her account factual and precise. She didn't dramatize. She didn't embellish. She just told the truth and let the evidence speak. By the end of the week, the story was already circulating through legal channels. It hadn't hit the press yet, but Halford's name was now tied to an internal investigation. She kept working, outwardly unchanged, but privately she was preparing for something bigger. Because if the department didn't take it seriously, she would take it to court. The notice to appear came in a plain manila envelope. No bold stamps, no flashing warnings. Just his name printed neatly on the front and a return address from Lucas County Civil Court. Sergeant Brent Halford opened it in the parking lot of the station halfway through his second cup of coffee. He expected it to be some departmental memo or a summons for a routine case. Instead, it was a formal civil rights complaint. Plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Amara Lewis. Allegations: unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop. Halford stared at the paper, lips curling into a disbelieving smile. "No way," he muttered under his breath. "This won't stick." But when he stepped inside the station, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations dropped to a low hum when he passed. Eyes followed him, not with the usual camaraderie, but with something closer to caution. Within minutes, his captain called him in. The blinds were drawn, the door shut behind him. "Dan," Captain Reed said, leaning back in his chair. "We've got a problem." Halford sat down, arms crossed. "Let me guess, the woman from the other night?" "She's not just the woman from the other night. She's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, a decorated combat veteran. Her record's clean, and she's got the whole thing on video, yours and hers." Halford scoffed. "So what? She got stopped like anyone else. She didn't like it, so now she's mad I didn't roll over." Reed's voice sharpened. "You escalated before you had cause. You treated her like a suspect before you even knew her name. And now you're going to court." Halford leaned back, letting the arrogance slide back over him like armor. "I didn't break the law." "That's not the point," Reed said flatly. "The point is, she's not afraid to challenge you. And this time, you can't hide behind the badge." While Halford clung to his belief that the case would vanish, Amara prepared for a different outcome entirely. She didn't hold press conferences. She didn't seek interviews. She worked quietly with her attorney, Mariah Benton, reviewing every second of footage, pausing, rewinding, noting the moments when Halford's hand hovered too close to his weapon, when his tone sharpened without reason, when his authority shifted from lawful to personal. Most people would let this go, Benton said one evening, scanning through the paperwork. I've let too much go already, Amara replied. This will be public. It will follow you. Good, she said simply. Let it. This wasn't about money. She wanted a public record. Something that would live beyond this trial, something that could be referenced the next time someone tried to excuse abuse of authority with the words, I was just following procedure. Word spread fast, not just through the police department, but across Fort Wayne and beyond. Soldiers who had served under Amara's command sent quiet messages of support. Some remembered how she had fought for them when their careers were threatened by politics or prejudice. Others knew exactly what it meant for a black woman to stand her ground without raising her voice. The date was set, 3 weeks out. In those weeks, Halford began to notice the shift. The locker room conversations cut short when he walked in. The sidelong glances from officers who'd once laughed with him in the break room. Even his union rep seemed measured, as if gauging how far they'd go to protect him this time. But Halford held tight to his narrative. She's just trying to make an example of me. She's overreacting. The morning of the trial was bright and sharp, sunlight spilling through the courthouse steps. The parking lot filled slowly, a mix of military uniforms, civilian clothes, and dark suits. Amara arrived in full service dress. The navy blue jacket fit perfectly, her ribbons and medals catching the light. Her posture wasn't for show, it was how she carried herself every day, in every room. But here it meant something more. It told the jury before she even spoke, I have lived by rules far stricter than yours, and I expect the same from those who enforce them. Halford was already seated at the defense table when she walked in. For the first time since that night, his smirk faltered. When Amara took the stand, the courtroom seemed to lean toward her without realizing it. I was driving home from a meeting, she began, her voice steady. I was pulled over without cause. I complied with every request. I asked reasonable questions. I was met with aggression. She described the stop without embellishment. How Halford's tone sharpened when she asked why. How he ordered her out of the vehicle without explaining the reason. How she began recording because she knew that without a record, the truth could be twisted. Did you ever refuse a lawful order? Her attorney asked. No. Did you resist in any way? No. Did you identify yourself? Yes. I informed him I was a federal employee driving a government vehicle. Then the videos played. First, her phone footage, steady, clear, undeniable. Then Halford's body cam, capturing his clipped responses, his proximity, the tension in his stance. You could feel the shift in the jury. When the defense attorney cross-examined, he kept his tone polite but probing. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis, is it possible Sergeant Halford was simply concerned for public safety? I was driving within the lines, sober and not aggressive, she said evenly. There was no safety concern. So why record the stop? Because silence isn't protection, she replied. That badge isn't a free pass. It's a responsibility. Finally, Halford himself was questioned. Why did you order her out of the vehicle? The prosecutor asked. She looked evasive. Did she disobey your commands? She questioned me. Is that illegal? A pause. No. Did she threaten you? No. Were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army? Not at the time. And if you had known? Another pause. I probably would have handled it differently. The words landed like a dropped weight in the quiet room. It was the closest he had come to admitting the truth, that it was never about safety, it was about control. The trial would last 2 more days, but by then, the heart of it was clear. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a test of whether power could be held accountable and whether quiet, steady resistance could stand against arrogance dressed as authority. And as both sides prepared for closing arguments, everyone in that courtroom knew someone's untouchable image was about to break. The courtroom was silent when the jury filed back in. Not the hushed murmur of a crowd waiting for entertainment, but the heavy silence of people who knew a decision here would ripple far beyond the walls. Halford sat rigid at the defense table, jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. His uniform pressed to perfection was the only thing about him that looked composed. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table, her attorney's hand resting lightly on hers. She didn't look at Halford. She didn't need to. The foreperson rose, holding the folded sheet of paper. The judge's voice was steady. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The paper was passed. The judge unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the words before reading them aloud. "Aye, in the matter of Lewis v. Halford, we find in favor of the plaintiff." A sharp inhale swept through the gallery. The judge continued. "Damages awarded in the amount of $250,000, plus court costs." Halford's face froze, the verdict sinking in like a blow he hadn't seen coming. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but the sound didn't seem to reach him. Across the aisle, Amara didn't smile, didn't cry. She simply nodded once, the same measured acknowledgement she might give after a successful mission briefing. This wasn't about the money. It was the acknowledgement, in black and white, that what had happened was wrong. That authority, no matter how decorated with badges and patches, was not immune to consequence. The judge banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." Halford stood quickly, as if motion might help him escape the weight pressing down on him. But as he turned toward the doors, he saw the cluster of reporters waiting outside, the glass microphones poised, cameras already rolling. Somewhere behind them, an officer from Internal Affairs was waiting with a sealed envelope. For Amara, the moment outside the courthouse was surreal. The cameras turned to her, flashes popping in the summer sun. Questions flew at her. "What does this verdict mean to you? Do you think this will change police conduct? Will you return to active duty?" She paused, looking directly into one of the cameras. "This was never about revenge," she said. "It was about accountability. If we wear a uniform, any uniform, we serve the people, not ourselves. And service without accountability is just power without restraint." Then she walked away. No victory lap, no grandstanding. Just the quiet dignity of someone who had said exactly what needed saying. Within a week, Halford was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. It wasn't technically a firing, not yet, but in the unspoken language of the department, it was the first step toward the end. Officers who once laughed with him now kept their distance. The locker room felt colder. Even the rookie patrolman looked through him instead of at him. The union kept its statements bland, citing due process and ongoing review. But behind closed doors, Halford's calls went unanswered. Meanwhile, the verdict spread far beyond Fort Wayne. Military forums buzzed with the story of Lieutenant Colonel Amara Lewis, the officer who had stood her ground against unlawful treatment and won. Civil rights groups requested interviews. Law schools began using the case in seminars about constitutional limits on police authority. At Fort Benning, where Amara had trained cadets years earlier, a photo of her in court uniform began circulating quietly through the barracks. The caption wasn't official, but it carried weight among those who saw it. "We are trained to stand against enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes the domestic ones wear badges." 3 weeks after the verdict, Halford was called to the captain's office. The blinds were open this time, sunlight spilling across the desk. "Sit down," Captain Reed said, voice neutral. Halford sat, shoulders stiff. "If this is about the review," Reed cut him off. "It's not just about the review. It's about your future." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a resignation form. Halford's eyes narrowed. "You can't force me." "I can't," Reed admitted. "But if you don't sign, the next paper you see will be your termination notice, and that will follow you farther than this verdict." For a moment, Halford looked like he might argue, but there was no fight left in his eyes, just a slow realization that the badge he thought was a shield had become an anchor, pulling him down. He signed. When Amara received the news that Halford had resigned, she didn't celebrate. She simply closed the email and sat for a moment in her kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. It wasn't joy, she felt, it was relief. Relief that the file on him would be marked, resigned under review. Relief that maybe, just maybe, the next person he pulled over wouldn't have to go through what she did. That night, she visited her father's grave. She stood there in the fading light, running her fingers lightly over the engraved name. "You always told me dignity isn't given," she said softly. "You have to keep it even when someone tries to take it from you." She left a small military challenge coin at the base of the headstone, not as a symbol of battle, but of resolve. The story might have ended there. For some, a lawsuit won, a career ended. But for Amara, it was just the midpoint, because accountability, she knew, wasn't a one-time act. It was a habit, a choice made again and again, even when no one was watching. And in the weeks that followed, she would face a choice that would test that belief all over again. 2 months after the verdict, life in Fort Wayne had settled back into its familiar rhythm: traffic lights, morning coffee lines, and the steady hum of a city that had already moved on to the next headline. But for Amara Lewis, the quiet was different now. It wasn't the silence of avoidance or isolation. It was the silence of space she had earned. It came on a Tuesday morning, a number she didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Colonel Lewis?" the voice on the line asked, tentative. "Yes," she replied. "This is Marcus Bennett. I served with Halford, not in the department in the Army Reserve. We weren't friends, not really, but I thought you should know. He's taken a job out of state, small town in Idaho. I heard he's not wearing a badge anymore." Amara didn't respond right away. The news felt strange, a mix of closure and something that wasn't quite pity but wasn't satisfaction either. "Thank you for telling me," she said at last. There was a pause on the other end. "For what it's worth, you were right to stand your ground. A lot of us wish we had." Weeks later, Amara was invited to speak at a leadership symposium for veterans transitioning to civilian life. She almost declined, and public speaking wasn't her favorite battlefield, but something in her said yes. Standing at the podium, she scanned the room of uniforms and plainclothes, young faces and weathered ones. "I learned something the hard way," she began. "In the service, we're taught to follow orders, but also to know when an order crosses the line. In civilian life, it's the same. Sometimes authority will test your limits, see if you'll fold to pressure, fear, or intimidation. And when you don't, when you stand your ground, it's not just for you. It's for the people who'll come after you." She paused, letting the silence carry the weight of her words. "Courage doesn't always look like charging a hill. Sometimes it's standing still when someone with more power tells you to move." The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was the kind that lingered steady, intentional. It was at the grocery store of all places. Amara was reaching for a box of pasta when she heard a small voice behind her. "Excuse me, are you Miss Lewis?" She turned to see a woman in her mid-30s, holding the hand of a boy no older than 9. "Yes," Amara said gently. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice catching. "My brother. He was stopped last year. Same officer. It didn't go the way it went with you. He didn't fight it. But after your case, it gave him the courage to file a complaint. They reopened it. He's doing better now." Amara's throat tightened. She crouched so she was eye level with the boy. "You take care of your uncle, okay?" she said. The boy nodded seriously. "I will." Though she never sought updates, whispers still found their way to her. A friend in law enforcement mentioned Halford had been seen working security at a private warehouse. No patrol car, no sirens. It wasn't vengeance, but it was a shift, a reminder that actions, unchecked, can eventually close the very doors they once opened. On a rainy Thursday, Amara found an envelope in her mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a short note. "You don't know me. I was on the jury in your case. When we went into deliberations, I wasn't sure which way I would vote. But when we looked at the evidence, and when we read your testimony again, it was clear. You weren't just standing up for yourself, you were standing up for all of us. Thank you, L." She read it twice, then placed it in the small wooden box on her desk, the one where she kept her father's medals and a few other pieces of her life that mattered most. Months later, On an early autumn morning, Amara sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the tree line. She thought about the strange arc her life had taken, from military deployments to courtrooms, from field briefings to speeches in hotel ballrooms. Some battles, she realized, you don't win by overpowering the enemy. You win by refusing to surrender your principles. And dignity. Dignity was heavy, but it was a weight worth carrying. As the light spilled over the horizon, she smiled faintly. Not the smile of someone who had won, but of someone who had endured, and in enduring, had changed something, even if only a little. She took another sip of coffee, the steam curling upward into the cool morning air. Somewhere out there, Halford was living a quieter life now. Maybe he'd learned something, maybe not, but that was no longer hers to carry. Hers was the weight of knowing she had faced him and the system behind him and walked away with her integrity intact. And in that quiet moment, she knew that was enough.